Hi everyone, my name is Emily and I'm the young adult librarian at the Rock Island Public Library, and since I'm on vacation this week, this is a pre-recorded book talk, and I have two titles for you today that are both available through our Libby app. And this first one is Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom, and this is a book by Lynda Blackmon Lowery, and was told to the co-authors Elspeth Leacock and Susan Buckley, and the subtitle is My Story of the 1965 Selma Voting Rights March. So of course it is Black History Month, and I'm going to be bringing you a lot of titles that I have read and enjoyed over the past few years. This one is just a really striking primary source, is what we used to call them, I guess, in like doing reports for school, but the author is writing about her life, and I think just there's this idea sometimes that, oh, the civil rights movement, that was so long ago. But it wasn't. I mean, this person, you can see her, she's still alive today, and she turned 15 on the way to Selma in 1965. So what you learn in this book is the author was put in jail 9 times before her 15th birthday. And this was part of this protest movement in which oftentimes what would happen is you see photos in here. Basically, student protesters, often in attempting to fight segregation, would go to a place and they would simply bow their heads to pray, and the next thing they knew, they would be arrested. They would be taken to jail. And this was challenging, especially for, I mean, as the youngest person, this was really just something that, especially going to Selma, Lynda was struggling because she had been not just in jail, that was scary enough, but also she was there for Bloody Sunday, which was at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And in trying to get into town as part of this march, Lynda was someone who was beaten up by police, and she was eventually taken to the hospital, but she had to live with being knocked unconscious and seeing her sister, who was also unconscious at the scene, and she had this moment of, oh, they've killed my sister's dead. And when she was like trying to wake up her sister, she wakes up and she screams because there's all this blood on Lynda's face from where she's been struck in the head. So it was just something where even after this, though she certainly had what I would say a very reasonable amount of fear of further violence, you know, having violence being done to her and other marchers, Lynda still joined the group March 22nd, 1965. That was her 15th birthday. And on their way to Selma, I mean, she was thinking about Governor George Wallace and thinking, hey, this person's the governor and he's supposed to represent everybody in the state, and he's not. He sent these people to beat up all these people at the bridge, people like me. I mean, at this time, she was 14. She turned 15 a bit after, but having said all that, knowing that there was a possibility for something similar to happen in the Selma Voting Rights March, she still insisted. What ended up happening was she talked with her dad, and in planning a march to Montgomery, the state capital, this was going to be like a 50-mile march. This was quite a trek. And she told her dad she wanted to go. He said no, it would be way too dangerous. But I pleaded and begged. He'd have to tie me up and lock me in the house to keep me from going, I told him. But luckily, she says, Ms. Mary Foster and Ms. Mary Lamar and some other church ladies said they needed help on the trip. They promised Daddy they'd look after me. So finally he said yes. It's a good thing he did, because I was going to go on that march no matter what. She writes about this movement. The Selma movement was a kids' movement. We didn't know it at the time, but we were making history. You have a voice too, and with determination, you can be a history maker just like me. And she writes about going back to Selma and back to school and feeling like a different person. I learned a lot of things on that march, and one of them was about fear, how to respect it and how to embrace it. I also learned that I was not alone, that there were a lot of people, white as well as black, who really cared about what happened to me, Lynda Blackmon, and the black people of Selma, Alabama. In writing this book, the author explains why voting is so important. She writes near the end, "This is why I went to jail and marched for the right to vote. This is why I rejoiced when the Voting Rights Act was passed in 1965, and why the day I turned 21, the voting age back then, I registered to vote. It was a great feeling registering, but for me to have that feeling, many people had paid a high price. The voting rights movement started in Selma before I was even born. There was a group of people so brave they were called the Courageous Eight. One of them, Amelia Boynton, had this big sign in her office that said, 'A voteless people is a hopeless people.' And I believe that. I really do." So if you're interested in learning about this moment in history from somebody who lived it and is still sharing that story today, check this out. Next, I've been kind of on a mystery kick lately, and this is the first in the Inspector Armand Gamache series. This is Still Life. And in this book, we are introduced to the town of Three Pines, where a woman named Jane, she is a retired school teacher, and one October morning she goes out for a walk. Interestingly enough, goes without her dog. She has a dog, but she goes walking in the woods, and she is found later by a neighbor, and this neighbor discovers her dead. She is just lying on the ground. And what eventually, as this is investigated, Inspector Gamache and his team, they come from Quebec. This is all happening, Montreal. They are in Quebec, the province of Canada. So there's some interesting cultural stuff that I wasn't aware of. When I was young, my family went to Ontario a lot, but in French Canada, in Quebec, in that area, there is more sort of historical awareness, I guess, in terms of the divisions between the French and the British within Canada. And that's what the Three Pines are actually about. This was like a symbol for the British. But most of the characters are bilingual. Most of them speak both English and French, or some mix of those two. And at one point, during Jane's funeral, in fact, it's observed that it is a Catholic funeral, even though Jane is Anglican. The whole thing's in French, even though she was somebody of British descent. So there's this interesting contrast. This is a small village, and the people, for the most part, are very close, and many are friends of the deceased. But the fact that she was found, Jane, found in the woods, dead, as this is investigated, it's found that there's just one wound on her body. There's a small hole that something went into her heart, and that's what killed her. And it corresponds with the size and shape of a hunting arrow. So there is, like, this is a type of arrow where it's almost like a circle, and then there's like a plus sign. So this is what hits. It's meant to hit a deer or something, but in this case, hit a person. And even if it hadn't hit her in the heart, the consensus seems to be, okay, well, she would have died. And at first, all right, the police look at this as though, oh, well, this is a hunting accident. This happens every year in Canada, and this time of year in particular, it's not unheard of for some tragedy like this to happen. But as the case is investigated, as this death is examined, starts to become more and more clear that no, it's not as simple as it looks. I mean, this isn't just an accident, this is a murder. Somebody killed this person, and it was quite intentional. This was not a hunting accident. So the book is trying to figure out who did it, Inspector Armand Gamache, and the people who work with him. I think the most interesting part of this book for me was the fact that you're getting the perspectives of the people in town. So you have residents of Three Pines and friends of Jane, but also, you know, you have the police, and you have like Peter and Clara, who were very close friends of Jane, but then you also have the family that is initially suspected because they're caught destroying what appears to be evidence. And all of these people are sort of reflecting on what they think is going on, or they're talking with each other, and as it becomes clear that, oh, this was a murder, near the end of the book, what ends up happening, sort of the climax of this, is the Arts Williamsburg vernissage. And there's a hurricane coming in, so there's already this thought of, oh, you know, there might be kind of bad weather, and also we're having this art show, and one of the artists was murdered, by the way, and this was going to be her first ever art show. By the way, Jane was someone who painted for most of her life. but we eventually find her family disapproved of this. They thought, no, they didn't like her style, which was very sort of offbeat, but very interesting. And she never showed any of her paintings to people until literally days before her death. And she was accepted into this art show, and she had something hidden in her house. She never, even her closest friends were not allowed into her house. And eventually we find out why. So the book is a really interesting story of this small town, and if you don't know a lot about Canada, you might just be interested in, it's basically what I would say is a cozy British mystery. It's kind of got that vibe of, oh, you're in this village, except it's a Canadian murder village. I think of this as being like, oh yeah, there's many books about British murder villages, these small towns in quiet hamlets where people just turn up dead in strange fashion every few months or so, but people still live in the village. One more time, both of these series are available through Libby. Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom is only available as an ebook, but I believe Still Life is both an ebook and an e-audiobook. So yeah, check these out. And thank you for watching. I will see you again next week.